Chapter 2. Who's there? I clench onto my pajama pants with the hope that it was just my twisted imagination getting the better of my thoughts, and no one was there, and my family was safe as they always were inside of our home. I slowly tiptoed toward the kitchen, using the light of the flickering TV to guide me as I traversed the hallway and into the kitchen. Beneath my feet, the wood floor creaked and warped surprisingly loud as the nails shifted from inside the baseboards beneath the floor, then back out, lingering just above the surface, waiting for another shift of my weight to force them back into the wood. As I reached the edge of the hallway that met the kitchen, I peeked around the corner, examining the darkness. As I reached the edge of the kitchen, I exhaled a sigh of relief since the door remained closed, and no one stood in our kitchen waiting to kill us all in our sleep. Before the breath could finish leaving my lungs, a shadow of a person shifted quickly outside the kitchen window, making me to jump back and cling onto the wall. I stood frozen as though I stood atop a cliff looking down into an endless valley, and the small indents of the plaster and the strength of my fingertips were all that prevented me from falling to my death. My heart thumped and raced as though it was going to burst from my chest. Then in an instant, it stopped along with the functions of my internal organs as I held my breath and listened intently to the shifting of the doorknob once again. This time it wasn't subtle, and the intent to push the door open caused the latch to thump against the strike plate. I worked up the courage to peek around the corner, and with every ounce of strength that I could muster up, I asked, "Who's there?" The room went silent, and between the curtains of the window, a set of eyes peered through at me, and a voice said,
"Isaiah, it's me, Riley. I came outside to see the clouds and watch them move across the night sky, but I accidentally locked myself out. Can you please let me in?"
A wash of solace allowed the pent-up oxygen in my lungs to shakily release a forced whisper. "How did you manage to lock yourself outside, Riley? You know that Mom and Dad don't want us going out this late in the night." I began to make my way over to the door with my eyes locked in with Riley's, who still looked at me through the opening of the curtains. For some reason, her eyes didn't look the same. They were still their normal light hazel green, but there was just something that seemed very different in the way in which she was looking at me. As I got closer to the door, I stretched my hand out, and I glanced back up at Riley, whose eyes no longer looked at me, but down to my outstretched hand that was unclasping the top lock. She had a thirst in her eyes with the way she was glaring at me through her long black hair that draped in front of her face, covering all but her eyes, nose, and perched mouth. Yet with what was visible, I noticed that my innocent younger sister Riley was not smiling at me for coming to her rescue, or afraid that if I didn't happen to come down the stairs that she would have had to wake my parents by knocking on the door. Instead, she smirked at me. With a click of the bottom lock, Riley's eyes darted away, and I suddenly felt a rush of pain crash into the side of my head and a taste of iron wash across my taste buds. I couldn't react or even move while my body toppled over and my head bounced off the tile flooring of the kitchen. The room quickly began to spin, and my vision shifted from darkness to light. Between the altering vision and the blurred kitchen, I caught a glimpse of a dark figure with a malicious smile standing in the opening of the doorway before the darkness could overtake the light, and I fell unconscious. Moments later, I awoke and groggily glanced over my shoulder and noticed that the door was still open, and the light from the moon that shined through the window between the curtains had been masked by dark clouds that overcasted the once empty skies. I slowly raised my right hand to the side of my head and felt a knot forming just above my temple. Then I shakily slid my fingers through my hair and rubbed the rear of my head where I had landed on the floor, and I could feel warm blood as it clotted in my hair. My mouth had also been bleeding since all I could taste was iron at the back of my throat, so I rolled my tongue around the inside of my mouth until I found a bite-sized cut in my left cheek from when the door had hit me in the face. I apparently instinctively tensed and bit my cheek while my body clenched up. I staggered to my feet using the island counter as a crutch to help me get up. When I finally made it to my feet, I leaned onto the island with both my elbows barring the blunt of my weight since my legs felt like noodles and I couldn't stand on them alone. I scanned around the kitchen trying to see if the dark figure was still there, and noticed that the TV in the living room where my parents were sleeping still bounced rays of light off the walls, illuminating the reflections of the characters that moved around the screen. With all my strength, I wobbled from counter to island while blinding flashes of light strobed from my concussed head, refracting images so rapidly to my vision that all I could make out were blots of lights. Slowly, my vision began to return to normal just before I made it to the edge of the kitchen, and I pushed my body against the wall to drag myself toward the living room, where I could now hear the hiss of the static coming from the TV. When I made it to the corner leading to the living room, I stopped and stood with one hand pressed against the wall and the other rubbing my eyes, trying to erase the image that was in front of me.